God's chosen uns, 7 superpowers, only the chosen gain in solitude that the world can't understand. Fade in. Early morning mist cloaks a quiet town. A weathered wooden house sits still as the sky begins to breathe light. Inside, a woman wakes. Not with an alarm, but with an ache she can't explain. Ava no longer counts the days. She stopped asking why everything feels poor. There are no more buzzing phones, no calendar alerts. Just the soft ticking of a clock in the kitchen, and a silence so thick it feels like God is holding his breath. Once again she finds herself awake at 3 a.m., not restless, not afraid, but summoned. Something deep inside her, something holy, rises before the sun, as if her spirit heard a voice her ears never could. She walks out onto the porch, clutching a steaming cup of tea. Fog swirls over the fields like a veil. The whole town sleeps. But in this hush, something stirs. Not around her, within her. And in that stillness, it dawns on her. This is not loneliness. It is a calling. The world thinks she's resting. Family thinks she's figuring it out. But heaven knows. Ava is being trained, not in front of crowds, not under lights, but in the wilderness, in silence, in sacred obscurity. You are not being ignored, you are being hidden for holy reasons. A whisper, not in her ears, but in her bones. Fade to black. A soft piano note. White letters emerge on screen. You were set apart so heaven could give you power. A story for every soul that felt forgotten, but was never unseen by God. Cinematic narration. Early morning. The fog has lifted slightly. Ava walks back inside her mother's old home, where every object holds a memory. The walls are quiet, but not empty. Ava used to have a rhythm. She taught music at the local school. Her laughter once filled this house, mingled with melodies, warm stew on the stove, and her mother humming hymns from the rocking chair. But ever since the stroke, the world fell silent. Her students moved on. Her friends stopped calling, and Ava stayed, caregiver by day, questioner by night. She wonders if she missed it, the life she was supposed to have. Every night she kneels to pray, but lately God feels distant, as if heaven itself had gone still. And yet, in that stillness, something stirs. She senses it in her bones. This is not punishment, this is preparation. But for what? She hasn't performed on a stage in years, hasn't sung in public, hasn't even opened the piano bench since her mother fell ill. And yet something in her spirit keeps whispering, "You're not forgotten, Ava. You're being formed." Now, in the sacred silence of Willow Hollow, Ava is about to learn the truth every chosen one must face. Before God reveals you, he refines you in the silence, in the shadows, in the secret place. The silence was the... Ava had never feared silence, not until it stayed too long. At first, the quiet came as a relief. No more nurses, no beeping machines, no long, exhausting days at the hospital. But now, even the wind outside seemed to tiptoe. She hadn't touched the piano in 6 months. It sat in the corner like a sealed tomb, covered with a lace cloth, untouched, sheet music still sitting open on a hymn from Easter 3 years ago. Each morning she rose before the sun, not from duty, but from a stirring, a divine kind of ache, one she couldn't explain, but couldn't ignore. She didn't hear God's voice, not like she used to, not in the scriptures she once read aloud beside her mother's bed, not in the church pews she sat in faithfully, not in the late-night prayers whispered with trembling hands. Instead, all she heard was silence. But it was a different kind of silence, not the kind that screamed absence, but the kind that felt strangely full and pressing, about to be born. She remembered the words her mother used to say, "Where God is quiet, it means heaven is writing." Ava poured her tea slowly and stepped outside to the porch. Same as always, same porch, same cracked boards. But this time, something felt different. The sky held its breath. The trees didn't move, but somehow the leaves whispered. And deep in her soul, a knowing pulsed. This quiet is not a void. It's a signal. It wasn't until her mother could no longer speak that Ava realized how loud love could be in silence. And maybe, just maybe, it was the same with God. That afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Just her name, written in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a note that said, "Sometimes God pauses the music to tune the instrument." Psalm 46:10. She read it 3 times. The tears didn't come like a flood. They came like a release. And with it came something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the kind that comes from understanding, but the kind that holds your hand while you don't. She folded the letter and placed it on top of the piano. Then, slowly, gently, she lifted the lace cloth. The dust danced in the light like gold, and for the first time in nearly a year, Ava sat at the keys. She didn't play. She just listened to the stillness, to the silence, to the whisper of a God who didn't leave. He just lowered his voice. Part 2. The fruit grew in the fire. It wasn't just her mother's body that broke down that year. It was Ava's world. No one ever prepares you for the slow kind of loss. The kind that doesn't come with sirens or sudden goodbyes, but lingers, turning strong women into silent watchers and daughters into quiet warriors. There were nights when Ava changed adult diapers by candlelight because the electricity had gone out, and the bill couldn't be paid that month. Nights when she spooned soup between whispered scriptures, praying over tremors that wouldn't stop. Nights when she sat on the floor, exhausted, staring at the wall, too numb to cry, and not once did anyone call. Not even her brother. Grief didn't come like a flood. Came like a slow leak in the ceiling, one she didn't notice until everything was soaked. But here's the miracle. She didn't break. Somehow, when no one was watching, Ava grew roots. She learned how to pray when heaven felt mute. She learned how to breathe when panic clawed at her chest. She learned how to speak peace over chaos. Not because she felt calm, but because she refused to drown. This wasn't the kind of strength you post on Instagram. This was the kind that heaven claps for in silence. She started journaling at night. Just one line, every evening. Today, I stayed. Today I didn't yell. Today, I was kind. Even when I was tired. The world didn't see it, but God did. And slowly, without fanfare or fireworks, a superpower began to grow inside her. It didn't sparkle. It didn't shout, but it showed up in the way she stood straighter even when her soul was limping. It showed up in how she could smile through a storm and mean it. It showed up in how she could walk into chaos and bring calm with her. This wasn't survival. It was spiritual stability. The fruit of the Spirit is self-control, and Ava had learned it, not in a classroom, but in a fire. She didn't realize it then, but while her life felt paused, God was growing something eternal, not on stages, not in crowds, but in late-night decisions to stay gentle when bitterness begged to bloom. in tear-stained choices to keep showing up. She wasn't becoming harder, she was becoming hallowed. One night, her mother passed quietly. No last words, no grand farewell, just a final breath and a holy hush. Ava didn't scream, she didn't crumble. She just sat by the bedside and whispered, "Well done, Mama. I'll carry what you taught me." Then she went to the kitchen, made tea, and wrote in her journal, "Today I didn't fall apart. Today I stayed standing." That night she heard it. Not audibly, but deeper than sound. You passed, and in that moment she understood. The test wasn't about performance. It was about who she chose to be in the fire. Part 3. The eyes that saw beyond the surface. Ava had learned to listen between the lines, not just to words, but to what wasn't said. At first she thought it was anxiety, a tightening in her chest around certain people, a strange heaviness in certain rooms. But over time she realized it wasn't fear, it was discernment. She first noticed it with Deacon James. On the outside he was all smiles and handshakes. He quoted scripture like a second language. He prayed with eloquence. But every time he stood behind the pulpit, Ava felt cold. It wasn't something he said. It was the air around him. Heavy. Off. She tried to ignore it, told herself she was overthinking. But then came the little girl. Her name was Lani, 7 years old. She never spoke much, but her eyes always found Ava's during the service, as if they shared a secret language made of silence. One Sunday, as the congregation left, Lani tugged at Ava's sleeve. She whispered, "It scares me." Just 3 words, but they were enough. Not because they proved anything, but because Ava already knew. It was the same knowing that stirred in her when strangers pretended. The same sense that whispered, "Don't sit there." The same invisible pull that led her to people who were breaking, even when their smiles never cracked. This wasn't intuition. It wasn't judgment. It was spiritual sight. The kind you earn in the wilderness. When you've been lied to, misread, manipulated, and yet still kept your heart soft. Ava didn't call it discernment at first. She called it exhaustion, because feeling everything was tiring. She felt grief before people admitted it, tension before the room shifted, the sense of danger behind praise, and peace in places others overlooked. One evening, Ava stood near the church entrance, just watching people pass. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just watched. The couple laughed as they exited, but she saw the fear behind the woman's eyes. The young man joked with his friends, but Ava felt the shame tangled in his shoulders. It was then she heard the whisper again, deep, steady. "You're not crazy, you're calibrated." Discernment isn't always for confrontation. Sometimes it's for intercession. Ava didn't call out Deacon James. She didn't accuse or expose. Instead, she began to pray. Every night, for Lani, for the women, for the room, that God would illuminate what darkness tries to hide. And slowly she became selective. She stopped answering every text, stopped attending every gathering, stopped explaining why. Not because she was rude, but because she was rooted. Things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. Her discernment wasn't just for protection, it was for direction. God was teaching her when to speak and when to stay silent, when to stay and when to leave, when to pour out and when to walk away. She no longer needed every connection. She longed for alignment. One morning she walked into the cafe and turned right back around. The air was sweet, the music soft, but something in her spirit said, "Not today." She didn't argue with it. She just obeyed. And hours later she'd find out a conflict broke out moments after she left. Not coincidence. Discernment was the invisible shield of the chosen, not to make her better than others, but to keep her on heaven's path. And in that still, quiet way, Ava learned to see, not through suspicion, not through fear, as through the lens of the Holy Spirit, who sees hearts, not headlines. Part 4. The map in her chest. There were days when Ava walked the old trail just to remember what it felt like to move forward. It was the same path her mother had once strolled, slowly, reverently, before the sickness. But now, it became more than a walk. It became a prayer, a question, a waiting place. Each step felt like a sentence in a silent conversation with God. And somewhere between the roots and wildflowers, she began to notice something. It wasn't a voice, not thunder, not angels, just a peace, soft, persistent, every time she imagined doing one specific thing. Teaching again, not at the school, not under fluorescent lights or state standards, but something small, something sacred. Maybe in her living room, maybe just one student. She didn't tell anyone at first. Didn't want to chase a feeling. But as she walked the trail that day, a strange clarity settled in her chest, like someone had placed a map there, not one with direction, but one that pointed to peace. That evening, Pastor Helen stopped by. She hadn't seen Ava in months. "I ran into the Thompson family," she said gently. "Did you know their daughter Mila hasn't spoken since her dad passed last fall?" Ava nodded slowly. Pastor Helen hesitated, then reached into her bag. "I don't know why, but I felt led to ask if you'd consider giving her piano lessons. Not for performance, just for healing." Ava didn't answer right away. She just pressed her hand to her chest. The same warmth returned. That quiet yes. That whisper of purpose. Not a lightning bolt, just a gentle inner knowing. She looked up and said simply, "Yes, I'll teach her." That night she sat at the piano, lit a candle, and ran her fingers across the keys. Softly, slowly, like she was waking something sacred. No sheet music, no performance, just flow, spirit, obedience. And something strange happened. She wept, not because she was sad, but because for the first time in years she felt aligned. "Your word is a lamp to my feet, and a light to my path." She always thought God's will would arrive like a loud knock, a flashing sign, a prophetic dream. But now she knew the truth. God doesn't always send maps. Sometimes He becomes the compass. In the days that followed, things began to move. Quietly, softly, but unmistakably. One neighbor told another. One mother asked for lessons. A silent girl smiled for the first time in months. Ava wasn't chasing opportunity. She was walking into it, not by effort, but by peace. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel lost. She felt led. She began to understand something sacred. You don't need to know the whole path when the next step is drenched in peace. You don't need the crowd when God gives you clarity, and you don't need to prove your calling when you've been personally summoned by the one who made you. Eva didn't have a 5-year plan, didn't need one. She had something better. She had the map in her chest, written by the same hands that shaped the stars and whispered her name before time began. Part 5. What the Wilderness Gave Her. The first time Mila touched the keys, she didn't play. She just pressed one note, and then another, soft, unsure, like someone testing if the world would shatter under sound. It didn't. It sang, not perfectly, not loudly, but purely. Ava sat beside her, said nothing. Just let the music speak. Let the stillness do what words could not. Each week more children came. A boy whose father was in prison. A girl who spoke too fast and never made eye contact. Twins who never smiled unless the music started. Ava didn't advertise. He didn't promote. She simply opened her door, and the broken came. Not for piano lessons, on presents, or peace. What they didn't know was Ava had nothing left to give when this began. But the wilderness had planted something in her. Healing. Not flashy, not fast, but holy. She'd walk through the grocery store and strangers would pause mid-aisle, not because they knew her, but because they felt her. Peace walked with her now, like a shadow, like a quiet fire that never burned out. It wasn't that she became someone new, it's that she became exactly who she was always meant to be. Now without apology, she no longer explained her solitude, no longer feared being misunderstood, is no longer apologized for needing rest, because she now understood what silence had given her, the gift of restraint, the authority of stillness, the voice that doesn't have to shout to be heard. One afternoon, as she was cleaning the room, she found an old journal. Slipping through the pages, she read her own handwriting. Today I stayed. Today I didn't fall apart. Today I chose love. And just like that, the tears came. Not sad ones, not exhausted ones, but grateful ones. Because now she knew those quiet, ordinary choices, they were worship. And what looked like failure to the world was actually faithfulness in heaven's eyes. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life. On the last day of the season, the children held a small recital in Ava's backyard. No stage, just a few folding chairs, a crooked music stand and a piano wheeled out onto the grass. As the sun dipped low, Mila stepped forward. She didn't say a word, just sat and played. It wasn't flawless, but it was free, and as the final note lingered in the air, Ava looked around at the faces, smiling, soft, teary-eyed, and she whispered beneath her breath, "This is what the wilderness gave me. Only platform, not applause, with a presence that turned rooms into refuge and silence into sanctuary." She had walked through the fire and emerged whole, not hardened, not loud, just holy. And in that moment, she finally understood. She was never being punished. She was being prepared. Ava never planned this life. She never asked for the silence, the slow unraveling, the long hidden years. But now, she wouldn't trade a single moment of the wilderness, because in the quiet, she met the voice that shaped her soul. She learnt that not all growth is loud, that some crowns are formed in private, and some assignments are sacred because they're unseen. So if you're in a season where everything feels paused, if you've been hidden, silenced, or forgotten by the world, maybe it's because heaven hasn't forgotten you. Maybe you've been set apart, so heaven could set something inside you on fire, and when the time is right, the fruit that no one saw growing will feed the very people you're called to heal. If you've ever walked through fire alone and wondered if God was still with you, if this story whispered to something deep inside your spirit, comment, "God didn't forget me, He was forming me." Share this with someone who's still waiting in silence. Let them know they're not being punished, they're being prepared. And if you believe messages like this matter, if you want to support the sacred work of sharing heaven's whispers with the world, Support the journey, because someone's healing may begin with the story you chose to share.